The question is the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Hunter.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'll always rise in this place to support a bill which extends road funding, because there is no more important issue in my electorate than roads. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a geographically large electorate, and of course on that basis has many roads leading to many places, and road funding, I suspect, no matter how hard any government tries, will always be underdone. But it's an issue, it's an economic issue we need to address. And I was listening intently to the member for Patterson. I have to say that not the last part of his speech, but the part of his speech nearing the end was more sensible and more accurate than the pieces which preceded it. He was talking about the Hunter Expressway, and I, with him, acknowledge the contributions of all those who have been involved. This was an initiative that started under a Labor government. As a candidate in 1995, I remember very vividly visiting the site with then Road Transport Minister Laurie Bratton to confirm Labor's commitment to what is the most important land infrastructure project in the Hunters' history. Alas, Labor lost the 1996 election, and then we had 11.5 years of nothing. 11.5 years of nothing, except it would be helpful if the member for Patterson was a little bit more patient and allowed me to finish what I'm saying, except for around $50 million which was dribbled into the program by the Howard government, which I accept and am happy to say kept the project somewhat alive. That money mainly went to land acquisitions, and as we all know, land acquisitions tend to make bodies like the then RTA money along the way if indeed a project doesn't proceed. The land is bought now. In 10 years' time, if the project doesn't proceed, of course, the land is sold again, usually at a healthy profit. And I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with that. But it doesn't mean there was ever commitment to construction. And the key point here, Mr Deputy Speaker, that in 11.5 years, not a sod of dirt was turned. 11.5 years. But I do acknowledge again that the project was kept alive by the then Howard government. I do acknowledge also that we did not have an enthusiastic state Labor government. Happy to acknowledge that. And I'm always happy to criticise Labor state governments when they get it wrong, as they occasionally do. This is a project worth $1.7 billion, and you can understand why a state government would be reluctant to participate, because any contribution by them, even if only 10% of the project, obviously is a very, very large one. And it is true that the New South Wales government was reluctant. Indeed, I don't think the member for Grayndler would mind me saying this, but when we announced that we would do the project, undertake the project, that is, we, the former Labor government, the New South Wales government remained very reluctant, and the member for Grayndler had to be very persuasive in his approaches to the New South Wales government to get them on board, and eventually they did, and of course they have contributed $200 million to the project. So it was a Labor government who conceived the project, it was a Labor government that planned the project, it's a Labor government which eventually funded and built the project. That is uncontestable, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the member for Patterson can create all sorts of excuses as to why they didn't undertake the project in 11.5 years. He can try very hard, as much as he likes. But the fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, is this. In 11.5 years they did nothing. That is an uncontestable fact. But I don't want this to be a blue about who takes the credit. I just want the thing open, and as do Hunter residents. But I do need to make this point. The first thing we did in Senate estimates after the 2007 election was to make a few inquiries about that $750 million, $780 million the member for Patterson was just talking about. I remember this very vividly too. John Howard, the then Prime Minister, flew into Williamtown on his VIP days, I think, possibly weeks, but I think days before the election. The member for Patterson will remember it well. I was Jim Lloyd, the Roads Minister. Well, I think the member for for Patterson for clarifying that point, but for also confirming the story I'm about to tell. So Jim Lloyd, flew into to the Hunter region to announce just days before. Well, he didn't criticise days before the election, so I assume that was right.
That's not contested.
Correct. I thank the member for Patterson for confirming. So after 11 and a half years, 11 and a half years, and concerned, of course, about the future of the member for Patterson, who, of course, wasn't a lay-down misere to return to this place at that point in time, and I think he's acknowledging that too by his smile. 11 and a half years, and then days before the election, the minister flies in and said, $780 million for the Hunter Expressway. Well, you know, who believed that? No one. So we went to the Senate estimates after the election to just find out what was the process and where is the money. Guess what, Mr Deputy Speaker? The cookie jar was bare. There was no $780 million at all. No $780 million. So 11 and a half years, but then days before an election, they come into my region, our region, and mislead the local people, mislead them into believing that finally, after 11 and a half years, there they were with $780 million. And by the way, I asked the member for Patterson, where was the balance? Where was the rest of the $1.7 billion going to come from?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Deputy Speaker, the member for Hunter has just asked me a question. I'd like to answer it on
Yeah,
intervention.
no, there's no point of order.
Well, there is, Deputy Speaker. If you read the standing orders, he's asked a question, I can answer it.
No.
This is.
No.
It's
Read the standing order. It's actually the person speaking is the one who asked the question. And so the standing order book's there. I'm sure that you're well acquainted with it. You might want to read it. Thank the member for Hunter to continue.
I think thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, there's another point I need to touch on. I didn't hear everything the member for Patterson said, but I think he was reflecting on a review that was done on this project post the 2007 election. Yeah. Now let me tell you another story, Mr Deputy Speaker. I started on the Hunter Expressway path in Easter of 1988. In Easter of 1988, I was a young, handsome councillor on Cessnock Council. Is that right?
I'd agree with that bit.
And on the eve of Easter of 19, I withdraw on the basis that there's some chance I might have misled the House. But in the eve of Easter of 1988, the then next section of the F3 freeway, now called the M-Way, opened to a place called Freeman's Waterholes, just short of Newcastle. What was the result? Suddenly we had both Pacific and New England Highway, National Highway traffic, spilling onto the roads through the Cessnock local government area, a disaster. And council needed to respond. That's when I started advocating for what we then called the Kurri-Kurri Corridor, but which has become the Hunter Expressway. So it's been a long time for me. But think about it, Mr Deputy Speaker. Finally, we started to get the Kurri Corridor route option in place, the design of the road sort of progressing, and then, as I said, for 11 and a half years, nothing happened. So when we were elected in 2007, we had a quite ageing response to a very serious problem. We also had, as I acknowledged, on the back of what the member for Patterson had to say, a reluctant New South Wales government. And we then had to persuade the New South Wales government that this was a project worth contributing to. So we had to review the project. As I said, 11 and a half years had lapsed. The question was this still the right corridor? Was this still the best response? Was this still economically viable? In other words, did it give the people the return required? So we did the very responsible thing, Mr Deputy Speaker. We had an independent consultant review the project. And at the time, yes, I said this is the right thing to be doing. This is $1.7 billion of taxpayers' money. If we're going to spend that, we need to make sure we spend it in a way which gives us the best result. And guess what, Mr Deputy Speaker? No one was more pleased than me, and I was a very nervous local member at the time because I was concerned so much time had elapsed that the independent consultants might say this isn't the right response. But thankfully, they confirmed the efficacy, the efficiency, the economic return. They confirmed that this was the right project to address the Hunters' problems. And the rest is history. Sometime after that, The then Prime Minister and I think Minister Albanese at the time, flew to the Hunter. Yes, we did, and we announced that we would fund the construction of the Hunter Expressway. Now again, I thank the coalition government for their $50 million in those 11.5 years. I thank them for acknowledging Labor's primary role in all this. I too am disappointed the New South Wales government was so reluctant to come to the table, but it was a Labor government that dragged them to the table in the end. I'm also happy to acknowledge that the global financial crisis perversely helped us in this process, because the government of the day was looking for money to create jobs in the economy, and this project created a lot of jobs, hundreds of jobs, and many flow-on effects to local contractors, etc. I remind the House that the member for Patterson opposed the stimulus package.
Could have been funded out of consolidated revenue.
He's just acknowledged, Mr Deputy Speaker, that he opposed the stimulus package. Does that mean that the member for Patterson also opposed the funding of the Hunter Expressway? I'll leave him to answer for himself. But I also note, Mr Deputy Speaker, that they continue to criticise the stimulus package. Day in, day out, they're in here saying Labor wasted all this money, racked up all of this debt on a daily, and he's acknowledging it again now. So I asked the member for Patterson, which projects shouldn't we have done? Should we have not built the Hunter Expressway? Should we have not built new school facilities, which they disparagingly call the school halls program? Daily, not daily, that's a fib. Often I visit schools who are still so grateful, Mr Deputy Speaker, at the opportunity the Labor government gave them, creating school infrastructure they could only have dreamed of previously. So I'll leave it for him to nominate at a later date which infrastructure projects he would not have rubber-stamped if he'd been part of the government of the day. But I just want to close by saying this quickly, Mr Deputy Speaker, and go back to where I began. Roads infrastructure in my electorate. The Hunter Expressway isn't the end of it. We need to address the traffic problem through Singleton. We need to address the traffic problems through Muswellbrook. It is poor. It is pretty much shovel-ready. Labor government continued to progress it. $10 million allocated last year to get it to shovel-ready. Ball's in your court now, Member for Patterson. This is an important economic project, the Muswellbrook bypass. I've spoken to Deputy Prime Minister Truss about it. I want to take a bipartisan approach to this. I want the government just to acknowledge the economic importance of this project and the adverse effect on amenity of the township not having a bypass is having. You know, we are the engine room of New South Wales and the Hunter Valley. We produce all the coal and most of the power generation, and we deserve to have more of that money coming back to our community. And that's what the mining tax was about, Mr Deputy Speaker, taking the economic rents from mines to return to local infrastructure. Now, I'm glad the member for Patterson mentions the Scone overpass, because that's where I'm going next. Labor committed money to the Scone overpass. It's in the budget. We're still waiting for the community to decide whether they want an overpass or a bypass of the town. I think eventually we will need both, Mr Deputy Speaker. Eventually we will need both. We have this ridiculous situation at the moment where a substantial township sitting on one of the country's primary highways is now cut in half for up to 8 minutes by coal trains at a level railway crossing. I mean, it's just unheard of, and it brings all sorts of safety implications as well. We need to go over that railway line, but the township will still need a bypass in the not-too-distant future, and I appeal to the government to take that issue very, very seriously. It's a project that must be done. I very proudly boast Hunter wine country in my electorate, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a wonderful thing. We make the world's best wines, we hold the world's best concerts, and the member for Patterson is now agreeing with me. But an area like that has to be supported by economic infrastructure. And the roads and the vineyards for too long have been a disgrace. I acknowledge the New South Wales government, Conservative government, is now doing something about it, and I welcome that. But I think to get the job done properly, we will need federal assistance as well. And maybe this bill provides that opportunity through the Roads to Recovery program. So on that basis, again, I say I support the bill. I support the ongoing Roads to Recovery program, and I make an appeal to the government and the minister to very seriously consider directing some of that money into Hunter wine country, an investment on which they will gain a very, very significant return in economic terms, and an investment which will be very welcomed by the local community and local businesses.
Thank the member for Hunter. The question is that the bill be now read a second time and call the member.